Hello, everybody, and welcome. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you for joining. My name is Christian Hauschild from White Research, part of the consortium working on the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum for the European Commission. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event on blockchain for social impact by the Observatory and Forum in collaboration with INATBA and IOTA. First, let's start with a little bit of housekeeping. The event will take approximately 2.5 hours. If you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A functionality only. You can either ask a question with your name or anonymously. If you wish to contribute or leave a remark, please do so in the chat. During the presentations or while the panels are discussing, you can write your questions in the Q&A. Most relevant questions will be selected by the moderators and then directed to the panelists. The workshop today will be recorded. Only what is said and presented on screen by panelists and moderators will be recorded, so your questions don't appear in the recording. The recorded version will then be uploaded on the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum's media channels a few days after the event. We will also be preparing a report, which will be published as well on the Observatory and Forum. Now back to the topic at hand. In general, if you talk to people about blockchain, most people will typically think of Bitcoin, and those a bit more aware of Ethereum. Some may think of crypto mining, energy usage, and so on, but very few people understand the potential of blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, or that these can be deployed in a number of different areas in different ways. We hope that this event today can help change that, as well as further the debate on blockchain and DLTs. We have some truly fascinating projects that will be presented today, presented by people who are exploring a range of application areas of these technologies. Now, before I go into more on the agenda for today's event, allow me to talk to you for a minute about the organizations involved in organizing the event. The EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum is an initiative from the European Commission's DG Connect, carried out by a consortium including Intrasoft International, the University of Nicosia, CERT, Bitfury, Open Forum Europe, Planet, and White Research. The observatory has as mission to monitor blockchain initiatives in Europe, produce a comprehensive source of blockchain knowledge, create an attractive and transparent forum for sharing information and opinion, and finally, make recommendations on the role the EU could play in blockchain. If you're interested in the Observatory and Forum's work, you can visit it on eublockchainforum.eu. Now, in addition to this, I'd like to introduce our collaborators for this event, INATBA and the IOTA Foundation. INATBA is the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, which offers public and private developers and users of distributed ledger technologies a global forum to interact with regulators and policymakers and bring blockchain technology to the next stage. The IOTA Foundation is a non-profit foundation which aims to research and implement the foundational protocol layer, standardize the protocol to ensure its widespread adoption, develop production-ready open source software, and educate on their technologies and promote their use cases. Moving back to the agenda for today. On the agenda, we have a keynote as well as 2 panels, all of which will be very interesting and very exciting. We will start with a keynote presentation. I'll come back to that in a minute, followed by our first panel, where we have 4 speakers that will talk about some very interesting projects that they're working on. And after these presentations, we will have a Q&A for this panel moderated by Åsa Dahlborn from the IOTA Foundation and part of INATBA's Social Impact Working Group. If you have questions for this panel or for the second panel for that matter, then don't hesitate to ask them in the Q&A. After that, it'll be my pleasure to talk to you again briefly, I promise, to introduce the second panel consisting of 3 speakers who work on equally interesting initiatives. This panel will also be followed by a Q&A moderated by Bara Greblova, co-chair of INATBA's Climate Action Working Group. And after the second panel, we'll have a brief conclusion to the event. With all this said, I'd like to thank you once again for joining. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers and moderators, as well as our partners. I will hand over to Mariana De La Roche from the IOTA Foundation and co-chair of INATBA's Social Impact Working Group to give her keynote on blockchain for social impact. Mariana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you see my screen now? Yes, I think that was a yes.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So good afternoon, and thank you everyone for attending this workshop to discuss and learn more about the potential of blockchain for sustainability. As you heard, my name is Marianela Roche, and I'm the lead project manager of IOTA Foundation and the co-chair of the social impact group of INATBA. I will try to don't take the 10 minutes that I was given this time because I want to give more time to the panel, as I think that most of the interesting topics we will discuss today are going to happen there. But I want to start by saying that with DLT, we can potentially address some of the most pressing challenges of our time, including climate change, poverty, inequality, hunger, and food waste, among others. So to provide you with a better idea about how DLT can benefit sustainability, my colleagues at the panel will present you 4 different use cases for blockchain for impact. So if I'm not wrong, they will talk about like climate applications, especially in regard to monitoring, reporting, and verification, but they will also talk about supply chain and how to use blockchain for the blue economy. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about like what is going on within INATBA and what we have been up to with the social impact groups. So this year and last year as well, together with the IOTA Foundation, iPoint System, Script Media, and Kunfund, we produced a report that was published in September this year, which presented the challenges and opportunities faced by blockchain projects when trying to address the SDGs. In the report participated 69 projects. They were located all over the world. Most of the headquarters, as always, are in the global north, but they are generating impact, or the projects that they are implementing are trying to generate impact in all the regions around the world, as you can see in the blue map on my screen. So what was interesting is that it came out of the report that like most of the projects are trying to address one of multiple SDGs. From the 69 projects that participate, 44% of them were or reported working on climate solutions, and 35% of them mentioning to be working on sustainable cities and communities, which, at least for me, is a clear sign of the interest of the blockchain community in supporting the efforts and the goals of climate and sustainability. So the report basically created 3 highlights that were presented as the main challenges that these projects reported. The first one was a lack of alignment among the projects in how they're measuring impact or what they even consume as impact. So there's no alignment whatsoever in what they're measuring or which kind of tooling are they using to measure. There's also difficulties to access or attract funds to implement or scale the projects. And of course, there is problems or challenges in regards to the interoperability among the different protocols. So there was an additional point raised by different projects in regards to the need for educating technical and non-technical people about the potential of DLT and blockchain. And there is a really interesting project in which IOTA and INATBA are cooperating right now, which is trying to create a curriculum about DLT for the Erasmus programs. The project name is Chase, in case that you want to Google and get more information. But to come back to the report concluded that there is a need for a standardized framework for measuring the impact of blockchain projects in society. And at INATBA right now, we are looking for support on creating such a model for measuring the social impact of blockchain projects to understand the actual impact of those projects in society from a holistic perspective. So how those projects are impacting the different dimensions of impact, such as gender, infrastructure, climate, and so on. And this way to also drive more investment into the sector, especially into those projects. So please feel free to reach out to us if this is a topic that you're interested in cooperate with us at INATBA. I would like to use the last minutes that I have to present one of the projects that we are working with the IOTA Foundation, and sadly we are not presenting on the panel because our technical lead is in another meeting today. But the project is called the DIGIT, or the DGIT. And it is funded by the European Union, and it will be implemented in 7 different mines in Europe. So like many other business, the mining industry also need to go greener. And the DGIT project develops and integrates oracles with a centralized industrial IoT platform using in the mining industry to securely export the trusted data across stakeholders, including the public. So having access to trusted and real-time machine data, as well as environmental data, allows for timely planning, as well as reaction, and risk mitigation. And this also increases the mining sector efficiency and safety. And by giving access to the public, it also increases transparency, which is a major plus for this industry right now. Basically, this project intends to create like digital twins of mines in different European countries to monitor the raw material production and the mine's environmental impact. So the idea at the end is to improve, as I mentioned, efficiency and sustainability of mining operations in an immutable and transparent way, with a process and technology that later on can be replicable in other regions, not only in Europe. So this example, together with the ones that you will see today and that will be presented today, showcase the potential of DLT and how these technologies actually provide us with a feasible chance to succeed in creating a sustainable and more equitable world for all of us. So I promised that I wanted to keep it short, and I already gave a lot of information. So I'm going to be connected during the panels. So if you have any particular question for me, please feel free to reach out via the chat or just like send it directly to me. And I will try to address as much as I can. So, well, with no further ado, I would like to hand over to Osa, who will start with the panel directly. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mariana, for your presentation. And the more important projects on the social impact potential on blockchain will be presented in this first panel, which I will be moderating. So my name is Åsa Dahlborn. I'm the project administrator of the IOTA Foundation, and I'm also a member of the Social Impact Working Group of INATBA. And this first panel will be focused on the social impact potential of blockchain and other DLTs. And we'll introduce the panelists and the projects that they will be talking about. We will start with Tom Baumann. He's the co-founder and CEO of Climate Check. And he will be presenting the DMRV project, digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, and the work that they're doing with climate monitoring. Next, we will have a presentation by Jörg Walden. He's the CEO and founder of the IPON Systems, and he will be talking about the work they're doing about the supply chain. And next will be a presentation of Ismael Arribas, which is the co-founder of Kumfood. And he will be talking about the work that they're doing for the protections of the oceans with the Blue Future organization. And the last presentation in the first panel will be by Wambui Wanjiku. She's the project coordinator working for the IOTA Foundation in the TLIP project. And she will be talking about the social impact potential of the DLTs with regards to this project. So I will be starting with handing over to Tom Baumann in order to present the DMRV project.
Thank you very much, Osa. Can you hear me fine and see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's event. I'm looking forward to learn more because it's quickly evolving space from all of the other panelists. And in the interest of sharing the limited time with so many great presentations, I'll move ahead about talking specifically on the challenges and solutions for carbon accounting and how we've developed digital measurement, reporting, and verification, or DMRV for short, applicable to both climate and sustainability to improve trust, utility, and the efficiency of the process itself, because it's so fundamental to helping tackle climate change. Let's see. Get the right screen here. So first, I'll give just a brief overview of the context for carbon accounting. I think everyone has heard of the Paris Agreement, and its goal is to try to limit average global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. And that can translate into a carbon budget, which is a quantity of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions that the atmosphere can take in, how much more from today. And there's about 320 billion tons additional emissions we can put into the atmosphere before we pass the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. Annually, the world is emitting in total somewhere around 40 billion tons every year. And that means there's only about 8 years left in the 1.5 degrees carbon budget. So a pretty extreme goal to try to achieve in very short time. Nothing less than a moonshot, or however you'd like to describe the size and magnitude of the challenge. Even the 2 degrees Celsius carbon budget, which is in about 25 years, is a big challenge. And yet, carbon accounting, for however boring that might sound, it's not carbon markets and climate finance and carbon taxes and all of that. It's just the quantity and quality of the greenhouse gas emissions being tracked. The errors are phenomenal. And that's a big problem if you're trying to craft policies and form markets that are meant to be efficient in deploying resources for maximum impact. So at a macro level, meaning like nationally and internationally, the errors are 10 to 30%. So if you think about that for a minute, if there's 40 billion tons, and some people that are being emitted annually, and some people are estimating over 13 billion tons variation, we've got an issue to solve. What are we talking about here before trying to implement pretty sophisticated solutions, technological and policy, and to make it efficient and equitable, et cetera. And at the micro level, meaning at the company or even their facility level, the errors are even bigger. And so all of these estimates could really benefit by improving how MRV is done. And I'm going to talk a bit more about some of these challenges and then jump into the solutions. The first challenge is we don't have enough people, MRV professionals. And I speak from the perspective of having been an MRV expert for well over 20 years, having co-founded another organization called the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute as a society for carbon accounting professionals. And there's over 10,000 professionals in nearly 200 countries. And this, as this figure shows, before the Paris Agreement, when the Kyoto Protocol was the game, we didn't have enough MRV experts. So verification reports could be submitted 8-10 months late because there just weren't enough auditors to verify all of the company reports. So we didn't have enough professionals to do that relatively smaller demand in terms of climate targets. The Paris Agreement, which everyone should know is really just the starting line. It's not the finishing line by a long shot. We have even a bigger gap between capabilities and the size of the demand. And when we look at sustainability and the regenerative economy going beyond Paris Agreement, you can see we just cannot service traditional methods, manual through experts, because it takes so long to build up that expertise. And so that's a driver for utilizing digital solutions to amplify expertise. Everyone, I think, has heard of the term greenwashing, more and more so, but it's been around for well over 20 years, and maybe since the beginning of kind of the environmental movement. And the expression of garbage in is garbage out, focusing on the quality and availability of data that's being used in any kind of green claims or green policies and markets and so on. So bad data in, bad results out. And rather than the expression of data as the new oil, when it's misused, it's more damaging, and well, oil's damaging enough from a climate perspective, but something catastrophic like plutonium, because we're not anywhere close to knowing what the numbers are. That's a different problem than actually solving the data issue, which I think is starting to happen through all of the IoT devices and our ability to generate so much data. But then we have another problem, which is the standards for MRV and climate broadly speaking. You can get good data in, use a bunch of inadequate standards, and then you get garbage out again. So we have to solve that issue at the same time if we want to be able to have confidence in the carbon accounting results. And I'm just going to give a few examples to highlight some of the cases where people are digging into what are the sources of errors, what kind. So on this slide here, you'll see a recent study in 2021 at the company level, and this was over 1,000 companies using some AI to analyze their carbon footprints. And they discovered, there's very limited carbon accounting that's being done sort of completely and comprehensively, and the errors are 30–40%. And so that right there speaks volumes. That's for companies that have a lot of money, developed countries, likewise, in contrast to the majority of countries and population where they don't have those resources. So you would expect them not to be able to get even that level of accuracy. Another couple slides highlighting these challenges. Google and the Environmental Defense Fund, an NGO in the United States, they went around with methane sensors and found the errors can be hundreds of times bigger. And likewise, another study that in the oil and gas space, they can be off by double, so 100% in those industry sectors. When you look at the finance space, so it's not just industrial or GHG accounting, but the climate finance and sustainability finance. The greenwashing is such a big problem, and it's built on what they call green and measure as green. $2 trillion of sustainable finance sort of written off because not credible and reliable. So big numbers, of course. Then different from greenwashing is green wishing. And so that's when countries, through making promises of how they're going to reach Paris, those promises aren't even big enough or close enough to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. So it's another form of claim without adequate accounting to back it up so that they know they're making the right strategies and so on. So to summarize, the challenges for carbon accounting and MRV are all over the place. Not enough expertise. It's a data issue. It's a standards issue. Credibility in the results, in how the MRV results are being used for finance and other policies. And if you've ever read a verification report about carbon accounting, the disclaimers are mind-boggling, and we can have a full workshop panel just on what these disclaimers are. And so when you look at the size of these errors and the goal to try to not surpass the carbon budget this decade, pretty much impossible without trying to tackle the issue with some digital innovations. And that's what we've been working on. Last point, not to be overlooked, is of course digital has a climate or carbon footprint issue to get to addressed as well. And it's not just distributed ledger technologies and blockchain. It's the internet and data centers, but there is improvements that are and solutions that are being deployed, which of course need to happen if these digital solutions are going to be claiming to be part of the solution of addressing climate change. So very quickly, what is digital MRV? I think that's a fair question people should ask because it comes in many shapes and forms. This is 3 nested boxes, and looking at the one at the bottom, the dark blue, the digital MRV solution, those are software, distributed ledger technology, some cases IoT, all different mixes that performs the measurement, reporting, and verification to a certain extent that an expert would have done. That's essentially the scope of what is commonly referred to as digital MRV, but that's nested within a systemic MRV set of solutions that look at how MRV reporting and accounting then feeds into registries and carbon markets and so on, and how the MRV standards themselves become digitized for implementation in digital MRV solutions. And then at a larger level, how do digital solutions in terms of governance and sort of social and system level change shape the context for these MRV solutions? Now, this might sound a little bit theoretical, but there's precedent, at least in the financial space, where they are doing digital transformation at a huge level, investing billions of dollars internally to modernize and digitize audit practices. And so you can see some of these familiar technologies that they're using. I think PwC, not that long ago, announced a $3 billion internal investment. So a lot of money. And that's for financial accounting and audit. Well, the same thing for non-financial, meaning climate, sustainability, social impact, is equally possible. In fact, probably as much urgency to get that happening sooner than later. There's already a huge base of digital solutions being used in carbon accounting. You see that on the left-hand side, calculators and GHG inventory software, emission factor databases, and so on. I'm looking at the right-hand side in terms of now using distributed ledger technologies, et cetera, to really elevate MRV from simply a carbon accounting to something that is seamlessly connected with the rest of that digital ecosystem for climate and sustainability. So in asking what is digital MRV, what scope of activities are being digitized? Is it simply the data collection from digital sensors? Which sources in a climate action or project are digitized? We have a couple of projects that we're working with IOTA on, one where all of the sources of data are digital sensors, and that's ideal. In other cases, there's relatively few that are real-time digital sensors, and other data is input essentially manually from hard copy receipts and things like that. So there's a big variation of how these digital MRV solutions are designed and implemented. As well, other than data collection, what kind of data quality assessment, how are the calculations actually performed, and is there any kind of built-in verification, in contrast to hiring an auditor who comes in and does a risk-based sampling, a little bit of spot audits here and there? How can you build in comprehensive auditing to elevate the quality of all of the MRV and to expedite that process as well? And then there's, which technologies are involved? Is it digital sensors, remote sensing, distributed ledger technology, digital twins? Huge variation if you were to look at all of the solution providers and then map out which technologies and applications. So you'll see that there isn't one sort of digital MRV solution that's in the marketplace. So just, I think 3 more slides very quickly. This slide here illustrates the software solution that we co-developed with IOTA. Looking at it from the top left-hand corner, the digital system on site is sort of the project developer. They've instrumented their site so that they can manage and operate the site using digital solutions more efficiently. We can tap into that, send the data into the IOTA Tango distributed ledger, and then on to the digital MRV platform, which builds in a user experience and interface that MRV professionals are familiar with, as they would, for example, do a site walkthrough normally and identify sensors and meters. How can that then be rendered in a 3D digital twin? And how can the overall layout, UI, UX, resemble to the extent possible how a verifier or an accreditor can relate to the information as comfortably as they would have without the digital solution? That system is complemented by a parallel solution that is regarding the development of the MRV standards and then turning those into the templates which are fed with information from the digital MRV solution. I can explain more about that if there are any questions during the Q&A period. And so the first pilot that we did, our rationale for picking them was that it was a well-proven, mature project type and technology, all new build, all new digital systems in place. So make it easy to prove digital MRV plugging into such a modern system. So we certainly cherry-picked that case and had a methodology that had been developed purposefully for this project in this location. And also because in this case, it was a landfill, there's a multitude of different stakeholders for the MRV. There's the country that does its national inventory. There's emissions coming off of landfills and waste and industry and so on. So they're counting for all of the emissions in their inventory. But then they're looking to how can we destroy this methane from the landfill because it's so damaging to the climate. So we have to track that under the mitigation box. And then all of the various types of climate finance from public sources like government and private sources to correlate climate finance, which is a huge area to track, with the carbon accounting of greenhouse gas emissions and the emission reductions that can become offsets. So just to conclude very briefly, digital solutions we know are already being used in smart cities and smart mobility, smart agriculture to help reduce carbon impacts like decarbonize industrial activities and so on. That's great. But we can also use the digital solutions to improve the carbon accounting, which is essential to be able to monetize those carbon benefits that are being achieved through investment and practice change in order to help accelerate and do the pivot towards a decarbonized economy. And then furthermore, looking at digital solutions to support the MRV system as a whole, because right now there's probably something like 10,000 MRV standards built for manual application, not digital. So they don't prescribe digital requirements for implementation and so on. So digital solutions can span all of those areas. And having said that, last point is, if you can envision a simple scale, 1 to 10, with 10 being, we've got digital MRV perfectly operating. It replaces 100 people every in terms of sectors or project types. And it's high quality, and it's giving us data that can be used for a variety of MRV stakeholders. If that's 10, and 1 is basically mostly existing digital solutions, none of the really emerging stuff coming out. Overall, the state of play is we're maybe at 2 or 3 at best in terms of digital MRV in the marketplace. It's got a lot of improvement, and that'll happen over a number of years. But really, it won't progress in terms of the fit for purpose or performance of digital MRV until we address the governance innovations that need to really drive the digital innovations and the climate innovations. So I hope that was informative, and I look forward to the questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was a very clear and detailed presentation. And it's very interesting indeed to see the potential of this DMRV solutions that you mentioned, and also the challenges. It's also very important. I will now hand over to our next panelist, it's Jörg Walden. He will be talking about the work that the IPON system is doing with the supply chain.
Okay. So I hope also you can hear me clear and see the presentation. Thanks so much.
We can.
Wonderful. So yeah, also very well welcome from my side here too. Thanks, Tom. Wonderful presentation. I love to see the result, and also for Mariana. I think we're working here good together and in INATBA to really think about what can we do with blockchain and where's blockchain. So really jumping into this, what are we doing here, and what areas are we working here from iPoint or a couple of startups we also have around us is, I think I don't have to explain, like Tom did a wonderful explanation here where we are and how to say specifically the last 2 years, every crisis is an opportunity. I think we have seen quite a challenging crisis, and we are still in there with COVID and all the other things around. And what does it mean now, and why I think there's a big opportunity, seeing that we need to change much faster, and seeing what digitalization can bring into these mega challenges we have with climate, with sustainable mobility, but also with thinking about the resources, what we have available. So closing the circuits here about the resources, it's quite an unbelievable challenge. And we are, how to say, the last generation who can really start thinking in the next 20 to 30 years, how can we do this? And how can we build responsibility, not only in our local silo here, also responsibility in the supply chain, around the climate, around the natural resources we are consuming here. How can we really build this ecosystem around this? And how do we need to connect data systems and automate a total different mindset into the organization, how they're building products? So what we are doing is coming a little bit from the product side. I think Tom explained how sustainability, how the impact from the financial side, from the end consumer side is really pushing organizations into a direction where they have to think about how they are producing products. Do they get even money in the future if they don't produce sustainable, whatever sustainable means. There's a lot of definitions. And this is one of the points we find out also in our group is the matrices and the number of measuring systems are quite confusing. And they're not only confusing if you look from the financial position side, so how do they rank, or governmental, how do they rank and see sustainable organizations? It's even more confusing if you go down to this product level, where I think personally is the only way how we can change the world in the future. If we are thinking and turning around this world and ecosystems, we have to think about what are we producing, what the outcome, and how we can build innovation as soon as possible, as fast as possible, with digitalization in design, in production, in the use phase or recycling phases. So this means thinking about innovation and design. It's always about how do you connecting your suppliers. I mean, we see this disruption in the moment, how the automotive industry is really rethinking how they're building products. Yeah. If you go to electric vehicle, you have maybe 20, 30% of your suppliers. How deep will the supply chain and how fast need to be the innovation to be fast enough if you want to go carbon neutral in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So there needs to be much more connected data systems and ecosystem automation in place to enable this fast turning wheel here to be high and fast enough with the innovation to deliver what we need to do. And the use phase, as another example here, is a lot of carbon data, a lot of carbon is produced in the use phases in the moment. So how can we think about this? If you go to electric vehicle, it's more the supply chain. How can we think about different use phase models with digitalization again? Yeah, sharing economy, other things are quite an important point. Yeah, and what's absolutely new is here in this industry, if you think about sustainable materials, if you think about new processes, is how do you connect these ecosystem partners who are in place? Recyclers talking with designers, that's something totally new. That's different silos, different mindsets, and different organization structures. That's what I mean. We have to rethink massively the way how we are producing products in the future here. Moving forward, then, if you think about just one indicator, I picked here the carbon footprint. Everybody talks about carbon footprint in the moment. Is that specifically depending on the product, what are you using? You see quite a huge difference in where is the carbon really generated. Is it in scope 1 or 2? Is it direct emission or indirect emission from the purchased energy or whatever? Or is it really sitting in your value chain? And it sounds, for IT people or whatever, it sounds always extremely easy. But talking about your supply chain, talking one level deeper than your next tier typically, it's nearly impossible in some industries. Yeah? And this is how do we communicate and how do we build systems fast enough that they are able to think about the product and with all supply chain partners together to improve the real footprint of the product, what's depending on the supply chain. And if you look about the supply chain, you can build this a little bit here in this flow here. You have material suppliers, you have supply chain partners who are sharing only partly data. And what we want to try here to show is how is this data and silos baked into systems, shifted from one system to the next system. You have interfaces, you have loss of data, loss of currency of data, you have speed time of data. And if you want to turn this around, you really need to think about one record who is unique, not in a centralized system, in a decentralized system, helping you to have much more accurate data and a much faster speed to enable you to innovate much faster your products, your material usage, your energy usage in the different phases of your supply chain. And looking about this is now really going from one material supplier to the next supply chain partner to your manufacturing plant, and also thinking about reuse of materials. It's extremely important to understand, depending on the branch, on the products, on the area of materials where you're working in, how is a product built? What's really on toxic or whatever materials in your component, in your battery or whatever. If you see the laws here, what we are getting here for batteries starting in 2025, there's a horizontal law who's really want to get everything into a product passport. I think we heard this often now today. And why do they want to have this information? It's always getting this for this recycler at the end. We should better use the material in multiple life cycles. It shouldn't go to waste. We shouldn't talk even about waste. We should really think about what can we do at the end of the first life cycle with materials and bring them back. It's not possible everywhere, but there's a lot of opportunities if we think about it in the right way if we're designing our products. Now, going into two small examples here. It's, I think, explained it a little bit. Carbon footprint challenge is supply chain emission scope 3. If you think about a car before it goes, and I think everybody heard about this, oh, there's so much energy used for producing all these rare earth materials, or materials what you put into the battery. So it's really depending on how much energy are we using in the production phase, in the growing or in the building of the battery, and how much are we using then if you're using green energy and drive this car at the end and in the use phase. So there's a lack of standard, there's a lack of data exchange interoperability, and there's a huge lack of trust between the different systems partners, because chemical providers have a huge a huge risk. They see a big risk in how do they share data, what can be shared, what cannot be shared, what's intellectual property or business advantage in the data set. So it's always a little bit one against the others. To find the right solution, I think you have to build a secure and trust way of information change. And this is where typically blockchains help you a lot, because you can much more automate the processes, trusted data, immutable data, as we all know. You can pack this information and it's not changeable anymore. So it goes against the flow and helps you building a PCF, so product carbon footprint data sheet, over the multiple tiers together in a single record for aggregating into your end product at the end. And this generates the visibility in the way that you see, okay, wow, this is materials, this is what we get in, this is the granulat, how it's built. Is it built out of recycled streams or whatever? Do we have recycling tokens attached to this batch, what we're getting and putting into our bumper? And if you're using this bumper, then okay, is it clear that this bumper comes from BASF with this footprint? Because we want to build a real sustainable car at the end and goes into this car. So it's traceability, trackability. And I want to start comparing then. As a designer in the early stage, I want to see, oh, I have different materials from different suppliers. What is the climate impact? What's the water usage? Different indicators should be measured. And I want to make a decision, maybe an automated decision. And for this, we need a huge trust in the data. There's not much time to start discussion and searching and maybe with lawyers and whatever, onboarding suppliers. It's better as we trust the data, as higher the automation can be, as better and faster we can innovate our products here on the footprint side. Putting this to the next level then is always, I think we heard about this, that's also the biggest challenge for every blockchain-driven project in the moment, I would say. It's data exchange interoperability between systems partners. There is the World Business Council now with this Pathfinder project. They're trying to build frameworks, what data needs to be exchanged, how can we trust the data, how do we calculate, because we want to compare apple with apple, and the boundaries should be clear what's in the data set. They're really trying to think about methodologies, how we can build better systems, better infrastructure to exchange carbon footprint. That's an interesting project, what's running and purporting here the different way. Looking about another indicator here, it's, I think we heard about this, it's also in the area of mining. Mining is specifically, it's tungsten, tungsten and stuff like this, the so-called conflict minerals. There were the big challenge in the US because they were part of the financial reporting and everybody wants to know and trust the data they get. I don't want to buy something what's potentially coming out of a conflict mine where I don't have data. So we build an infrastructure here and a prototype. What's really getting into this two-folded streams. So the one folder is the upstream, where the minerals are mined, put to the trader, packed in packages, put to the exporter, another trader, and in the smelter. And in the smelter, typically everything ends. Because if you're putting something in, you don't know what's in exactly. You can know what you're buying, and you have a full track record of what you're buying, but you can throw in recycled materials and whatever, and you only can make something like a mass balance at the end and pushing this then up to the downstream supply chain, to your trader, to your car, to your product. And at the end, you are able then, with a trusted record, to say it's 90% coming out of mine, 10%, I even don't know, maybe recycled, whatever, or maybe 100% if you have a full transparency about mass balances in your smelt and supply chain. Paying systems are typically then going around the other way. So paying for data, product as a data, material as a data service, then you're not only buying material, you're attaching this data package to your material batch. This means pushing token in the other way around helps you then getting the data from the supply chain, because that's the worst and hardest thing. Who really wants to share the data, especially for free? Nearly nobody. It costs a lot of money, and they want to have something as a substitution here in these chains. So I hope it was a really short jump now over different approaches of circularity, sustainable, and supply chain dependencies. I think there's quite now like this opportunity, what I see driven by the digitalization. What we see now after COVID, everybody accepts digitalization. Everybody accepts more and more cloud infrastructure system connected and trust in data. And if you are using this window of opportunity and seeing what are driven governments projects like Catena-X or the World Business Council, or in the US, more the MOBI approaches, there are a couple of projects now who are really trying to build standards, interoperability systems, and putting together business partners over multiple dimensions to enable us to move to a sustainable future. So thanks for your time. Thank you for having me here, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Jörg, for another great and very informative presentation about how the whole supply chain can be tracked, which is indeed very relevant. Now I would like to hand over to the third panelist. This is Ismael Arribas. He will be talking about the Blue Future organization.
Hello, everyone. Hope you can see me. I cannot share the screen, by the way.
Sorry, could you unshare? Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ismael.
No, not at all. I will be very quick on the time, by the way, and thank you very much for this invitation. Let's talk about the Blue Future organization, where we are, what we are doing, and really we are aiming in regards on the global sustainable market mechanism. Today, it's amazing, the previous colleagues, how we are tackling the circumstances. Before, what is it? Really, we name us as the 7 digital blue hubs, as a multi-stakeholder platform. Really, we were exploring during the last 3 years how we can evolve the seaweed farming and practices in a sustainable reporting way to transition from the farm to fork, from the farm to finance. We were clear in some fundamentals in our decentralized autonomous community. Let's say we need to be accountable and resolvable because we are dealing business in nature. Obviously, Tom mentioned very clearly how is the Paris Agreement and the status quo with the European Green Deal is where we are oriented. You will see during the presentation the key orchestration results we gathered in these 3 years made us being not only naturally as multidisciplinary professionals join in this decentralized autonomous organization, committed with the standards, even though we are committed with people and technology for a climatic impact driver. And hopefully we will enjoy during the presentation, because rather to a lot of SDGs that we can tackle with these efforts in these 3 years, we are focused on the waters. We are focused on the SDG 14. And in a technological peace moment, it's necessary a kind of technological peace moment for us that could provide strong institutions and a kind of a new digital justice naturally, blockchain for us is an exercise and an expression of the SDG 17. During our exploration in 2019, well, some red point for all the areas. Indeed, this is the percentage in the United States, well, in the Americas, let's say. It's important. It's important. So the efficiency of the carbon effect that were very clearly mentioned today, it doesn't happen. Similarly happen in Europe, where it's around 90% importing, 95% is while harvesting. So lack of certification about the practices and many kind of circumstances. However, the indication of the markets in the whole globe are running, for instance, with this indication from Latin America, where 242 billion in 22 will be from the global aquaculture market. Afterwards of this observation, we could define a description of what is the blue circular economy, trying to match in some parameters like the UNCTAD for biotrade and biocommerce. Today, we're very great highlighting the problem with the compensation, with the carbon effect, how this production, it's gonna be mitigating not only the calculations. And there is another problem about authorities and the farming, the oceans competencies and the coastal and maritime areas are from the states and from the countries. Therefore, it's necessary to will a kind of lobby where blockchain here is a perfect environment to bring a trusted data sharing for blue bonds and different kind of invocable circumstances for the carbon effects. Let's say that our journey in 2020 and 21, some highlight points is that last year we were one of the 12 startups qualified by the OECD Blockchain Policy Forum. And we call it ourselves the dial for the European Green Deal. It is the dial because we identify that it's necessary to amplify the visibility of the scientific, botanic researches and all of the farming efforts. We had some candidacies that are very happy to receive in the Blockchain for Humanity. We have one bioremediation business unit working within Spain, thanks to Alastria ecosystem. And we have a tremendous environment thanks to one of our governors, which is Coronosa Alliance. And the Blue Co is a crisis committee who is helping a lot from the knowledge they have, specifically in Gwangdo, Ireland, in South Korea, whereby more than 1,000 farmers are not only providing us the allowance to be the exclusive distributor for an ocean care mass pack made by kelp, one macroalgae, even though it's a multilateral circumstances and multi-jurisdictional circumstances for the European network with the Korean colleagues. We received the Agricultural Innovation Award in September, and in COP26, really, we made a new impact. We introduced where we are hands-on. Let me be sure that you see.
Millions of years ago, algae and seaweed populated our blue planet. They absorbed carbon and created the precious oxygen that made further evolution of life possible. Burning fossil fuels at first was not a problem, but doing that without proper compensation is what has put the balance of life on our planet at stake. Now, what if within the origin of the problem would also lie the solution? What if fossil fuels were a renewable? What if algae, nature's carbon absorber, would be the global solution? What if we would break the establishment? How crazy would that be? when by adding blue, everything would turn green? What if the whole of humanity would unite into a decentralized, autonomous organization? And what if we would all live in a well-balanced ecosystem? What if we would have a solution at hand to be able to restore the balance? Meet the BFO2, the Blue Future O2 boat. The world's first carbon compensation workship, the global solution based on algae farming. The world's most advanced technologies converge to build and power the BFO2. A high-tech accelerator for seaweed farming, producing blue carbon credits while traveling the high seas and coastal areas. IOTA testbed is set to demonstrate the implementation of tech for climate in practice. Algae, the gold standard of carbon absorption and oxygen production. Nature at its best. Algae, the enablers of life. Join us on our journey while we steer climate action today for a carbon negative, nature positive future tomorrow, making net zero a real possibility by 2030. Join us at the BFO, where by adding blue, everything turns green.
Let's come back to the point we were. So that impacted us a lot in terms of the networking, but we were clearly with one fundamental in the DAO. We are not going to reinvention any kind of wheel. So the IoT received us very welcome as a new member, and the Alliance of Internet of Things Innovation allow us to demonstrate this fund to finance. For the moment, we are going to explore the protocol performance for 5 protocols in this moment. However, there are going another 2 or 3 and welcome anyone, because really we are a movement for our planet. And the next nuclear part or piece is the extensibility of over the business events, how this reporting, this monitoring could be autonomously workable. And XBRL provide us real global circumstances. One of our governors, Eric, is introducing in the spring on 2021 the blockchain interoperability maturity model that we are really pursuing since the chaos till the maturity. Let's say that we consider that BFO is right now in these circumstances because we are testing at different levels some intellectual properties. We are offering, for instance, from the quantum computing, the patents that are going to be assessed in the European Standards Telecommunication Institute for the edge computing circumstances. And this part is very clear to us, but there are a nuclear part for us, people first, because it's our planet. Well, further this, the model and the sustainable development model was introduced by the core components of the XBRL Global Ledger in UNCEFAT. Really, this is how we consider the conscious of our decentralization. Is based on how we can build the blue economy and real blue economy, not traditional names, with the resources we have in terms of technology, but also with the schemas that already have. Taxonomies from XBRL allow us to make an extensible business exercise over the top of the blockchain and the DLT and being the proper enabler on our circumstances. We want to thank you, the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum, not only this time because I am really a panelist this year, and the experience in this community is amazing. Therefore, making out loud the voice. And as a founding member of INATBA, it's my pleasure to contribute with the impact that the social impact, redundancy, is doing the working group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ismael. That was a great presentation, and I personally loved the video as well. It's a very good job. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor over to the last panelist, definitely not least. This is Wambui Wanjiku. She will be presenting the TLIP project, which stands for Trade Logistics Information Platform.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Osa. I'll take you through the Trade Logistics Information Pipeline project. This is a project, it's a partnership between IOTA Foundation and Trademark East Africa. Trademark East Africa is an NGO based in East Africa that focuses on reducing the barriers around trade to foster trade within East Africa. So the Trade Logistics Information Pipeline project came about as they were thinking of how they can really make simplify trade and digitize trade to ensure that everyone who's involved within trade is able to focus on really what they're supposed to focus on. When you think about trade currently, and in this case, we are looking at flower export, there are so many actors that are involved, and at the same time, too much documentation that is exchanged between these actors. And this is quite cumbersome, and at the same time, you really don't know what to trust. And for that, because of the trust issues, more than often there's insistence on physical documentation, which can take forever to see a cargo cleared or goods getting to the destination market. So to resolve this, we've been thinking about the supply chain as one, just a minute, thinking of it as one organization whereby everyone who is involved within the supply chain can see any documentation that has been released or shared related to a certain cargo. So TLIP, is looking at the use of distributed ledger technology, whereby the distributed ledger is going to be a layer between the government authorities and the other parties that are involved within trade, and can provide a service where all the documentation shared can be seen at any given time, and it's real time. With this transaction layer, then it gives very high traceability and visibility, that one is able to verify if documents are indeed legit, and if there has been any changes, at what point this was changed, and if this was authorized or not. That way, it's going to be very possible to eliminate paper for trade across borders, and at the same time, it is going to create trust within the parties that are involved within the transaction. So what must this solution do? One, it is going to enable time savings. The elimination of paper and waiting for the hard copies to be sent or to be delivered together with the cargo will save a lot of time, and it will make it easier to clear goods, thus increasing the amount of cargo or exports that are going outside East Africa or coming into East Africa. At the same time, one truth is going to be visible. It is because the solution is picking the documents from the source, then there is no chances of this being tampered with, and it is going to be seen as what was shared in the initial stages of the transaction. At the same time, this is going to be owned collectively. We are involving everybody who is involved in the value chain to design to design and develop the solution to make sure that their desires are captured within the solution so that they can own this collectively and contribute toward the success of the implementation in East Africa. At the same time, we will not really tamper with any of the current infrastructure. For instance, if the government institutions already have their ERPs or their custom systems, we are not going to hamper that, but we're going to just complement that and add a layer that will allow the integrations to happen and the sharing of documents. So there's really no much of changes that are going to happen within the institutions that we integrate with. This also are fostering adoption by all. That's why we're involving everybody through working through the design thinking methodology so that we can ensure that everybody is involved and they actually have contributed towards the design and development of these. What kind of benefits will this solution provide to customs and also to the countries in general? One, risk assessment is going to be very easy because with the provision of the visibility of all the documents and the information, then they are able to really do their risk mitigation that's likely to happen during the transaction or even the transportation of goods. At the same time, it's going to help counter illicit fraud and forgery because the document is shared from source and it's unlikely to be tampered. And more importantly, trade facilitation is going to be increased. There's some World Economic Forum has already forecasted that if 50% of cross-border trade, if the processes across border trade are improved, this is going to see about 5% growth in the GDP. And what does that mean? That means more jobs created and also more income for countries because there will be an increase of goods going in and coming out of a certain country. So with that in mind, this is an open source solution. IOTA Tango is an open solution. So this can be implemented in any country at any given time. And anyone who'd be interested would be happy to discuss and see how this can be implemented in their countries. If you allow me, please, I'm going to play a short video just to show you how this works.
When we, I think you've only shared your presentation, so we can't see the video.
Come again?
We can only see the presentation, so I think you need to unshare the presentation and
okay.
then share the video.
Thank you. Just a minute. Just a minute. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. It's a short video.
But I don't know if it's just me, but I cannot hear.
No, indeed.
Yeah, there's no sound.
You need to enable sound sharing in the Zoom application, I think.
Okay. I think, do we have more time, Christian?
I think we're running quite tight on time.
Okay. I think I will leave it at that because it's part of the presentation. Then I can share the presentation and people can see the screen.
You also can share the link.
Yes, let me share the link. Okay, thank you. So thank you very much. That's it from me. I will welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Van Boei, for another great presentation. And yeah, as we mentioned, you just please feel free to share the link here in the chat because I know this video and it's also a great video, so it can be interesting to see. And this is the end of presentations for the first panel and the start of the Q&A session. I can see that we have still not received any questions for the panelists in the chat. So please feel free to raise any questions. We still have about 20 minutes for the Q&A session. And yeah, I would like to start by thanking every one of you. You all had great presentations showing the very good potential of DLT and other blockchain and other DLTs to tackle these issues, social issues and environmental and sustainability issues. And I would like to ask you a little bit about the challenges and the barriers you see for this technology to be used in these areas you mentioned. I saw that a few of you mentioned standardization challenges and challenges with regards to trust in data. So would you like to expand a little bit of that? Maybe Tom, you mentioned the standardization challenges and also you, Jörg.
Thanks very much. So well, the standardization challenge has been ongoing in the climate space to differentiate climate standards from, say, data standards or digital standards, more broadly speaking. Climate standards, there continue to be more and more standards being developed and even new standards organizations, which are trying to address some of the issues that I highlighted in terms of coordinating and harmonizing climate standards, which is an important, I think, first step before climate standards are then sort of converted into smart contract code and otherwise automated in digital solutions rather than have a practitioner or professional apply the standards. So we need to harmonize for the perspective of environmental integrity and make it easier for users to apply and then convert those standards into not only digital or smart standards, but to restructure the standards because there will never be an end to needing to refine those standards. So modularizing the standards so that they can be more quickly updated and cost effectively is part of the need in the climate space and sustainability more broadly.
Yeah, so let me maybe add 2 points here. I think Tom 100% agree. I think the challenge specifically with standards is, and if you look in product reporting, product carbon footprint reporting, or even compliance and other dimensions, is where do you set the boundaries and what do you want to measure? And the ISO or other certification institutes are really trying to do the best. Organizations like large material suppliers trying to establish more on support this, establish frameworks where they can support this. Because if you don't start at the bottom of the supply chain, we never be able to get the full product visibility and transparency. And the matrix about how do you measure are often driven by, I would say, a little bit, yeah, I can also switch, sorry. The matrices are always driven by, I would say, some company-related advantages and disadvantages. Yeah, for sure, you want to be the best in some of these areas, and so it's not so easy to find a common approach in these standard areas that you can interoperability exchange information. Yeah, and what I see in some industries, it's not only the definition of the standard, the metric and the boundaries. What's a big challenge and opportunity is also the intellectual property in these industries. Yeah, so if they're exchanging data and you want to see the metric behind how these data is calculated and measured and whatever, often you need to see a lot of deep process information and supplier information, what you maybe don't want to share. And this exactly gives us the challenge. How can you create systems where you secure companies and organizations, but even able to exchange information over the supply chain? Yeah.
I would like to jump, if you may allow, because there is an effort from Stand ICT to converge different technologies. As you could see today, our ambition is to coordinate, excuse me, is to coordinate, the Murphy, is to coordinate a multi-technology ecosystem environment. Something that we are learning by listening, because this is the key. And hopefully I could respond also to Jose Santos' question about the public and private sector. You were talking very brilliant about the validation of the calculation, about how to match all these circumstances. There is a mess that also Tom mentioned on regards on the different standards. Let's make it simple. This is about digital events. There is a universal language adopted by the financial sector. We take this extensible business XBRL. I want to mention because we really believe that this is a nuclear facilitator for this multi-space of technologies. And this is one standard adopted de facto by the financial industry and the listed companies globally. But further this, there are not clear, and I am talking like we have different hats in the BFO in terms of standardization. Some of us is the chair of the DLT working group in the IoT. Myself is co-chairing the UOS, which is the European Observatory for Standardization of ICT, in concrete for the blockchain, where there are 11 initiatives there. I am also convener of the smart contract. These circumstances is how I learned that we need to spread ourselves to match the public, the private, and the standards de jure, to harmonize the regulation, because the regulation is the big barrier. You cannot impose one country, one circumstances, but we can impose the highest level of your ethics by digital event. And we advance because of the pandemic circumstances a lot in our digitalization, as we mentioned today. So I think that the standards are there, but are very dense material. So it's not easy. Just to highlight that overview on behalf of our contribution. And it's volunteer, which match a lot with the climate action.
Thank you very much for your input on these questions, Tom, Jörg, and Ismail. And I see we have now a question from the public, which is for all panelists, about what you think about the future development of your projects regarding main challenges that you encounter and foresee, And how do you see the necessary relation between public at different levels and private spheres? And I saw, Ismail, that you already started answering this question a little bit. So for the other ones of you, what would you have to say with regards to this, the main challenges and what you expect of these projects for the near future?
Tom, you want to
Okay.
go first?
Sure. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks for the question. And in the Q&A box, I tried to follow up on a response Mariana had started in terms of which governments or public groups we're working with, including not-for-profits. During COP26, we announced a new initiative, an open collaboration initiative with Gold Standard Foundation based out of Switzerland in order to start a multi-stakeholder process in outlining the work streams, the general architecture to bridge the climate space and the digital space in order to develop the sort of ecosystem of solutions, which is going to be a combination of public and private stakeholders and entities, because in some cases we need, the publicly shared resources, like the frameworks and some open data, open standards, but in other cases, leverage private and commercial capabilities in specific applications that can accelerate ultimately the deployment of resources for the impact. So it is definitely a long process to socialize and cultivate this in itself innovative governance model to help bridge those two areas. So for us, the challenge is communicating effectively the vision and attracting sufficient interest to build the momentum on a relatively rapid timeline so that it's time sensitive to market needs and stakeholder needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe let me add two sentences. I fully agreed. Tom, I think what we see from our side here is a little bit also maybe giving us this example, I don't know, Catena X or Global Battery Alliance. There's quite a lot of initiatives are starting, partly driven by public funded, partly driven by own initiatives by large companies who are trying really to establish transparency. You have leading CEOs who are really sustainable mindset who are trying to push something forward. So it's a co-competition approach where I see there's the big opportunity that you bring together business, IT, and governmental driven requirements and establish a communication channel here, what helps these projects to get the right scalability here. And how they're doing this typically is if you see this often either, I think it depends on US or here, maybe more the European model is governmental financed projects, building some open source infrastructure backbone platform. On the top of this, you're hitting on with your maybe your solutions where you can have in a shop the capability to sell a business application and help the community here to grow much faster than. So it's an open source mixture model. I think what's quite interesting and helps the industry really moving forward. It's a little bit different than pushing these money in what we see in the US with the startups, and it's different finance, but at the end, it helps building this scalability and interoperability much faster than we have seen it in the past year.
Agree. Just one note. It's about the social ledger.
Mm-hmm.
And DigiGrow is doing great things in the European space with anti-rival policies. We follow that understanding because competition, cooperation, collaboration, competition is necessary, but how this technology could be anti-rival as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ismail, Jörg, and Tom, for your input on this question. I would like to ask you, Wambui, with regards to the TLIP project, do you also see the same challenges that Tom, Jörg, and Ismail mentioned, or what kind of challenges or opportunities do you see in the future for the TLIP project, maybe with regards to policy and skills and available knowledge?
Thank you, Otha. I think the biggest challenge for the TLIP project would be readiness for governments when it comes to how far they are digitizing their processes in the revenue authorities or relevant bodies that handle exports, both destination and source markets. And then with the traders, it will be mainly the skill, would need to do a lot of training and awareness creation to just make them understand what it is, it all entails and the benefits that they are going to reap off using the TLIP solution. So I foresee, I mean, the good thing with Africa is lately there has been a lot of a buzz in technology and there has been a lot of adoption. I mean, when you think about most of innovations, talk of M-Pesa has come from Africa. So I don't see an issue with adoption, but it is now for us to really communicate, create the awareness and also build the capacity within the government institutions and also the other stakeholders who are involved in running these systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bambui. And yes, definitely, it's very important to get to the governments involved for these projects. And with regards to then the solutions for these challenges, what would you everyone say? What suggestions would you, or what suggestions would you have for solutions for these most important challenges that you have highlighted? Some recommendations, maybe with regards to like policy or.
Okay, I jump.
Please do.
Yes, we are trying to distress the regulatory barriers by an accountable system which could be transparent and public. Our boats are autonomously producing the carbon compensation because it's restoration effect. But what about the destiny? The market is very important for the efficiency of the carbon compensation, not only calculation and reduction. So we identified that by an autonomous reporting, there are few parameters. Sustainable practice, we identify some biotrade practices that are mapped already. Sustainable development practice. There are some ISO families in regards on social responsibility, like 26,000 family, but to distress the regulatory barriers, the public administration needs to be on time, on real time with this reporting and monitoring.
Thank you, Ismail. Would any one of the you other panelists like to add something to the question of solutions or to what Ismail just mentioned?
I'd like to quickly mention that in the context of sustainability and climate, the magnitude of transformational change can't be overstated. It's just a huge, huge effort. In that us as individuals, in our variety of hats that we wear, should also consider not just personal lifestyle transformational change ourselves, but how we interact socially and in governance. Is sort of the motto of transformational change is going to need transformational change in how we interact with each other, set norms and rules that encompass our values and ethics that are going to be automated through these digital systems out of necessity because of the size of the challenge, how fast we have to move, the flow through of resources. And so I try to highlight the importance that all of us, and there's many ambitious, bold actors here, and in our families, it's a mixed bag, you know, and in our friends and so on. But if we're going to succeed, especially together, the courage to adopt that type of transformational change in our attitudes and how we interact is just as important. as the financial and digital and clean tech and all of that that needs to be sure we're not polluting ourselves to death.
Thank you very much, Tom. So I think that you all have had very interesting presentations and input for this panel. And now it's already 4 o'clock, at least in the Central European time. So unless anyone would have any last points to mention or I can't see any more questions in the chat. So unless anyone would like to mention any last point, then I would hand over. Yeah, thank you very much as well, Tom. Then otherwise I would hand over to Christian to introduce the second panel.
Thank you, Rosa. What an excellent panel that was. Thank you so much to everybody. We have a second and equally fascinating panel. I'll give an introduction in just a minute. But first, I also want to thank Osa and Mariana for their excellent contributions, as well as our previous panelists. Our second panel will be moderated by Bar Greblova from the IOTA Foundation and co-chair of INATBA's Climate Action Working Group. In terms of panelists, we have 3. Our first panelist in the second panel is Kathy Mulligan from the University of Lisbon and leader of Decentral. Kathy will be talking to us about Decentral and the research that they're doing for sustainability and social good. After that, we'll hear about blockchain for environmental offsetting by Alex Casas, head of blockchain at Climate Trade and Climate Coin. Last but not least, we'll hear about climate adaptation from Carl Schultz, who is also from INATBA's Resilience and Adaptation Group, or Adaptation Ledger. With that said, I will hand over to Bar Greblova to moderate this next panel.
Thank you so much, Christian, and excuse me. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning to all the audience. Thank you to all the panelists for being here. Thank you to the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum for inviting me. Just one correction, I don't represent IOTA Foundation. I work for Future Energy Foundation. And as said, I am the co-chair of the Climate Action Working Group at INATBA, and I'm also the board member of the association. So with that said, as Christian said, we have wonderful panelists for this second session. So I would like to give the floor to Kathy Mulligan for her presentation. Kathy, the floor is yours.
Fabulous. So thank you all very much for your time today, and thanks for the opportunity to present. So as mentioned, so I've just moved to Lisbon, and I'm working at Instituto Superior Técnico at the University of Lisbon. We've created a new sort of activity, a new center called Decentral, which is looking at decentralization for sustainability and social good. So I've got a slightly different presentation from everyone else's because we're a relatively new activity. So this is more to present what we're aiming to do and to ask people to reach out if they're looking for research or research partners or any of those kind of things. So sorry, my apologies. There we go. So for those of you who don't know, I think most of you will, the ERA chair is the European Research Area Project chairs. So the ERA chairs, I think there's 5 running at the moment. And the idea of the ERA chairs is that's supposed to assist in the creation of new skills and new areas in different countries, basically. So the ERA chair I'm on is BIG, which is looking at blockchain and design innovation for social good. It's a 5-year project where we've just finished the first year at the moment. I myself, I'm the ERA chair, I'm the chairholder and the professor who's leading this particular activity across quite a few different research areas. I started in May 2021, so like I said, we're quite new, but we are now in the position that we're off the ground, up and running, and really excited to work with people. And so we're developing really depth of research in decentralization. And I've deliberately looked at decentralization rather than blockchain in and of itself, because I think the technologies of blockchain give us some types of decentralization, but there are all the associated technologies, which many of the people in the previous panel also touched on, that I think are extremely important to understand in that context. We're an interdisciplinary research team. So, we are not focused solely on the technology. We are looking and interested in the technology, but we are significantly interested in its use, its application, and its ultimate overall impact in the world. So we have the interdisciplinary areas of distributed systems, cybersecurity, environmental engineering, HCI and design, digital economics, and also telecommunications. Those are some of the people that we are working with across the university. And some of the initial sort of questions that we're starting to work on is that decentralization can help, but it can also hinder sustainability. So we've seen a lot of discussions around the energy consumption of Bitcoin or things like that, right? So depending how we build our decentralized systems, this can actually also they can help us or it can hinder us. So we need to think about those. And what we're trying to do is work out the exact frameworks and models that can help us with those. Another key area that I think is really fascinating, in particular around sustainability and social good, is this idea of governance mechanisms. So we've all been all very well aware of things like DAOs, NFTs, all of these kind of things. And DAOs initially look very, very, very democratic, but actually they are not necessarily all that democratic over time. And so understanding how to build effective, appropriate governance mechanisms to ensure that, the overall project maintains its focus on sustainability and social good, I think is extremely important. We're also really focused on socioeconomic areas, and we are looking at that from both the design and HCI perspective, but also in depth from the economic perspective as well. The other part is new technology paradigms. I think there's a lot of research that's been done in blockchain. To be honest, the mandate that we have set ourselves is to push the boundaries of that research. I think a lot of the research at the moment could be pushed a lot harder to deliver better results for both Europe and the world. So some of our current projects, we've been looking at the environmental impact of cryptocurrencies. So for example, we have some projects looking at how you would do green mining and green routing for cryptocurrencies. We've got other people who are looking at how you would understand when to use a blockchain solution. So when is it most appropriate to apply blockchain to actually create environmental impact or CO2 reduction, and when does it actually have a net negative effect? We've got some people looking at how you can create independent economies using blockchain. We've also got other people looking at cultural heritage. So one of the things that's quite interesting about climate change, if you think about it in depth, is actually quite a lot of our cultural heritage, in particular parts of Europe, is based around the oceans. It's based around the seas. It's based around some of these entities that are actually going to change pretty dramatically. So how do we protect some of that cultural heritage using the blockchain? And more importantly, how do we record it in case some of these actually do fall by the wayside? There's two that I'm super interested in and super excited about. One is water management. So how can we fund the rollout of water infrastructure using blockchain? I've got some ideas. So we'll be working on those over the next year or so. The other one is food supply chains, and we're looking at that from a very particular perspective. So I've done a lot of work in food supply chains before, but we're looking at how you would use blockchain and decentralized technologies to create resilience in food supply chains. Currently, the world's food supply chains are massively brittle. They're massively globalized and massively sort of dependent. If there's one bottleneck, the whole thing breaks. So we're looking at how you can use it to create resilience rather than efficiency, which is what the majority of blockchain solutions have been about so far. We're actively looking for partners across the world. So if anyone is looking for research partners or feel that they might need some research partners, please do call us and we will do our absolute best to help. And those are the contacts for that. So I'm a moderator's dream because I'm very quick. Thank you.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much, Katie. And what a wonderful set of projects. And it's actually for the first time I hear about cultural heritage and blockchain and how we can use blockchain for possible solutions. So thank you so much. I might ask you about that later in the panel. So I would like to give the floor to our second panelist, to Alex Casas from the Climate Trade. Alex, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Bara. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Thanks a lot to the European Observatory, Blockchain Observatory, INATBA and IOTA. And yeah, I don't want to make a long presentation, but show some action. But I would like to first introduce a bit who we are. Climate Trade, concretely Climate Coin, was the first project to tokenize carbon credit back in 2018. And as such, we were mentioned in a UN report as a base for creating a global carbon market and enabling peer-to-peer carbon transactions and connecting to IoT. What happened? It was too early. The market was not ready to work with tokenized carbon credits. So we made a pivot and created Climate Trade as a marketplace in which we use blockchain to give accountability and transparency to the different flows of money and carbon credits that were occurring in the marketplace. And after that, we made for smaller companies and different kinds of consumption an API that allows any company to introduce a carbon offsetting process in their point of sale, so customers can directly offset their purchase in the same process, and also a widget that is quite similar, but is more directed to companies that doesn't have a big IT department and can't afford to integrate the API. So today we are working with clients of a big entity such as Suez or Banco Santander, Telefónica, Acciona, or Melia. You might notice that are mostly Spanish companies, like also the Spanish, the National Post Service, but we are now expanding to the United States. We have already set our headquarters in Miami and expand our operations in Europe. And so far, our platform has offset more than 1.5 million carbon tons, which I think it's a pretty decent amount for the time being of our operation. And regarding to blockchain, I think we have a pretty decent experience in the use of protocols that we started with Ethereum. Then we realized that it was not aligned with our ethos to be using a network that was causing such a high energy consumption and thus footprint. So we migrated to Stellar, and lately we have migrated to Algorand, which is the greenest blockchain in the space probably, and had a perfect mix about being aligned with our ethos, the performance, capabilities, and all the needs that we have to fulfill our plans. One of the things that we realize and have detected as a pain point in carbon markets, mostly in voluntary carbon markets, is the transparency about the pricing. For example, it was like really difficult to know how much of a given carbon credits purchase was going to the effectively developer of the project, how much was the broker keeping, and so on. And it was also a very, very friction, a process with a lot of friction, sometimes involving phone calls, mails to retire credits, and so on. So what we did is what I'm gonna show you right now, because I think that movement demonstrates by moving. So with your permission, I would like to do a very, very quick example in real time and in real about how are we tracking the movement in the marketplace. I guess you are already seeing the screen, right?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Okay, so this is the first thing that any user of Climate Trade will see in the marketplace. We have here like a search bar. So for making it simpler, I'm gonna suppose I wanna look for a project in Colombia. Let's see what we have here. Okay, we have nature-based solution and carbon offsetting. Let's assume I'm interested in carbon offsetting. And okay, I'm gonna have a look to this project. And here I can see, apart from all the description of the project, location, SDGs that is affecting. I can see, for example, here the project ID, the host country, the official project website. And first thing that we start to realize that is a little bit different. Every project developer has an Algorand account in which they have their CO2 tokens available. So I can see here that this is a relatively new project that was just a top up with 7,000 tons. So, okay. I also have here all the validation documentation, who was the validator, first verifier, and so on. And now I'm gonna purchase 1 ton. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm offsetting the carbon for my company's trips and the rest is okay. I have a balance here, but I can also pay with credit card, PayPal, or bank transfer, and crypto coming soon. So I'm gonna pay. And my transaction is getting recorded on the Algorand blockchain right now, and we are gonna see what happens. All right, just a moment. This is the blockchain things, you know. 3 seconds and we are done. No worries. This is not Bitcoin.
That's okay. It's so amazing.
Okay, so the transaction is made. So I have here my transaction. I can enter in my dashboard and see the details of my purchase of this ton. And I have a preliminary certificate here that will show me, apart from my company and the amount of tons, will show me a very, very curious thing. There is an Algorand transactions group where I'm gonna check to explain how is it working. So you see a group of transactions that were performed all at the same time. It's a group of atomic transactions. So the first transaction that we see here is $3.97 out of my balance were converted to euros. So this is my account. And here we can see how out of the 3.54 euros that I paid, we can see how 3 euros are going to the developer account, 0.54 are going to our account for the fee, our fee and taxes, and also a 10% here is coming from the developer to us as like the seller's fee. And last, we can see here how one of those tokens that we saw before are going from the address of the developer to a dumping account, a retirement account, in which we can see here the balances. We can see that the developer, the project developer, had this balance, and now their dumping account. This is the first credit, by the way, that is canceled in this project, and this is retired. So if we go back to our dashboard, we might see that then I will have an official compensation certificate that will come in a couple of days or 3 days with all the details. This blockchain certificate is like a preliminary, and also to have access to the group of transactions and have that transparency about how my purchase was split. But in a few days, I will receive a mail with the official certificate from the official registry. Probably in this case, should be a registry from Colombia, which is the official certificate and the official invoice for my purchase. And this is it. I don't want to take more than the 10 minutes. I know we are a bit delayed. So after, if there is any questions, I will be really, really happy to address them. So yeah, thanks a lot. Merry Christmas, everyone. I will place my email in the chat if anyone wants to contact, and can't wait to see the rest of the presentation. Very, very exciting and interesting workshop. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Alex. Really, really very interesting presentation of what your company is doing. And as was mentioned, please post your questions to the Q&A section if you have any questions. Our last but not least panelist is Carl Schultz, and I would like to give the floor to him. Carl, it's always nice to see you at workshops and events, so please tell us more about your company and your project.
Bara, that's mutual. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm not going to focus so much on how, but more on why. And that's because the subject I'm covering is adaptation to climate change, and how blockchain is relevant. And the premise, the starting point, is that there needs to be more awareness of the issue. So we're going to talk about adaptation first. But first of all, this is a conference on social good, and oftentimes we think of climate as always being an environmental issue. But adaptation is certainly an environmental issue, but it's also a social impact issue, and perhaps more so, as the World Bank has noted, that the challenges that increased wildfires, floods, and other stresses really does require societies to think about, well, what should they value and how should they engage? And I'm hopeful that we can address these issues adequately, and that there's a role for blockchain and distributed ledger and digital technologies, broadly speaking, a necessary role for us to get there. As I said, I want to focus most of this on what is adaptation. And first of all, I suspect that most of you are very aware, but some may not actually know the distinction between mitigation and adaptation. And so I'm going to try to spell it out. And that is that mitigation is reducing emissions. It's about how to reduce these compounds that are in the atmosphere so that we can reduce global heating. Now, adaptation is dealing with adjusting or getting out of the way of the impacts of that global heating. It has to do with adapting human systems, and it has to do with strengthening natural systems. And it's, broadly speaking, addressing social, economic, environmental, and governance structures. That's what it's about. Very fundamental thing that we need to be doing. Where does it happen? Everywhere. It happens in our health systems, in our coastal areas. It happens with our agriculture and supply chains, everywhere. What are the types of adaptation? There's a lot of these, and this isn't an adaptation technology seminar here, but there are solutions that are ecosystem-based, nature-based solutions, as has been referenced before. There's also hybrid options, and then there are infrastructure-based operations, and also there's political, social, and operational issues that come to bear. Is it worth it? Well, yes, it's worth it. If we don't start investing in more climate resilient infrastructure and more climate resilient ways to manage the supply chain, we're at a grave economic loss. And there have been a lot of studies that have shown how much that physical climate impacts and indirect impacts really puts the brake on economic growth. It puts a brake beyond that, I think, however. And so it's a good investment. It's also necessary to realize that we're dealing with human vulnerability here, and that oftentimes isn't always accounted for when you're looking at things from an economic perspective. But there are a lot of challenges. For one thing, it's important that investment go towards appropriate adaptation. Yet there's very little attention to adaptation and impact investing and ESG reporting. The TCFD does have a physical impact aspect to it, but there's very little guidance. And when it comes to it, it's more looking at the risks as opposed to considering what the adaptations that are required that corporations should be undertaking for their own good, for them to be good investment opportunities. There's also an issue around how the standards and best practices for adaptation have yet to be coherently organized. There's a term, no time to get into it, but you can adapt and you can maladapt. You can undertake measures that actually make things worse, or you can undertake measures, say, upstream in a river basin that impact negatively people downstream, and vice versa. So we need to have appropriate understanding of the good practices, the best practices, and the standards that can better assure that we avoid maladaptation. And then there's a challenge of integration and policy on coherence. This, I think, is very critical. If one doesn't look at all of the tools that we have at our disposal, including distributed ledger technologies and other digital technologies in particular, we could look at satellite imagery, we could look at ways that big data can be deployed, and Internet of Things to bring information from the project level, from the infrastructure level, from the place where actually climate impacts are occurring and where adaptations need to be undertaken, then we're really missing out. These need to be integrated. But I do want to note that at the Conference of Parties in Glasgow last month, I was there and I did see, compared to past COPs, a considerable increase in the attention to adaptation. There's greater attention to the adaptation finance gap, where currently much more resources are deployed for mitigation than adaptation. There's also much more interest, in particular in the part of vulnerable, poor, developing countries, and more attention by wealthy countries that have resources to support activities to reduce the impacts of climate change. And these have been spelled out through initiatives like the Race to Resilience, the Adaptation Resource Alliance, and the Sharm el-Sheikh work program for next year's COP, where we're looking at how we can develop an appropriate adaptation work program for the global stocktake to occur in 2023. So there's no time for us to just sit around and come up with an app here and an app there. There's a need for transformational change. This is something that Tom Baumann discussed, the essential need for transformation and integration. And this has to cover all of the different systems, overlapping systems that arise. I'm not going to get into these, but all of these different issues around services, finance, governance, metrics, sustainability, how there's policy coherence between the various initiatives and the various digital governance innovations that exist are critical. So I would suggest that an integrated platform or system is really required to overcome these challenges and to realize the opportunities. And so we've come up with a high-level conceptualization for how this could look. We call it the adaptation ledger ecosystem. And what it tries to do is marry digital technology, governance, and expertise with various solutions that are at a high level, at a general application level, general platform level, but also to bring in the needs of partners and customers across everything from contracting to pilot projects and scaling to monitoring, evaluation, and finance, not least of which is policy and regulatory issues. So what's the purpose of this? Well, the aim is transformational change so that we can have system level scaling and speed up of adaptation. We need to do this with massive investment into climate adaptation that's currently not mobilized. It is resulting in more and more people suffering loss of life, loss of property, damage and disruption to supply chains, damage to the environment, broadly speaking, and basically, I feel a sense of potential pessimism and despair about the future that's all too well articulated, especially by the young people in societies. We need to do this by overcoming these challenges in a way that can allow for this poorly formed system for adaptation that's immature and not connected and slow moving, so that we can reduce the costs and improve the data and environmental integrity, and also increase transparency and tracking so that we can get finance where it's needed. But now that's a general application. That's a needed transformation that we require, but we need to do this with a suite of specific applications. And so the idea we have is that we call it which is a suite of adaptation tools that are customizable for different application developers, so that we can help mobilize finance for information conveyance, smart standards, governance, and also deploying metrics such as the climate vulnerability reduction credit that can allow for the adaptation benefits to be rewarded and incentivized to the point where they become just the norm. And so I'll just show you one example of an Adapt IT application. It's what we call WACS, or Well-Adapted Coffee Supply. Let me just talk a little bit about this just very briefly here. What does it do? Well, it provides DLT-enabled, robust, verifiable information on coffee supply attributes, how coffee growers are adapting to climate change, and how the supply chain is undertaking risk reduction and adaptation so that it can be robust. And the benefits of it are for producers, potential for bringing in finance through the transfer of adaptation benefits information through VRCs, and the conveyance down of rewards, as is done, as was just noted by the previous speaker, in the carbon markets already, and can be done better and better and equally well within the adaptation space. Buyers have the potential for better data so that they can have better decision-making around sourcing and supporting what options they can do to help support adaptation of coffee growers, for instance. Financiers can have better risk profile information, and consumers can help to actually play a role too in supporting vulnerable farmers with specific information, perhaps on their coffee cup. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all, and would be most interested in your comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Carl. And I think it's so important that you spoke about the transformational change, and Tom mentioned it as well, and that we can't just work on an app here and there, and kind of interconnectivity or interoperability of sectors is really important. So I would like to open the Q&A panel right now with all three panelists. And for our attendees, please feel free to post any questions in the Q&A box. I have actually a few questions myself that I would like to ask, and that's just something that popped in my mind when you were speaking. So we have the topic of blockchain versus sustainability. It's a very hot topic, obviously. There's two camps basically. So I would actually like to ask Katie, because I know they're doing research on the environmental impact of crypto. What is your stance on that? If you can explain your view.
Yeah, sure. So apologies, I'm not going to put my video on because my wash machine just leaked all over the floor. So, so my apologies for that. Okay. But speaking about, I've got very localized environmental damage. No, so the environmental damage, I think, of cryptocurrency. I mean, we've seen lots of discussions, right, around Bitcoin and the energy consumption. There's two things that I think are really interesting. I think that we need to understand, firstly, not just the energy consumption, the CO2 output, but also by a potential biodiversity loss across the entire supply chain of, Bitcoin machines, or indeed other cryptocurrency machines. The reason for that is actually the biggest problem is the churn. It's the number of new sort of CPUs that need to be put in every couple of months. I think the rate of change, for example, of mining kits is well under 18 months at the moment, which is, much faster than you even replace your mobile device. So the environmental impact is about much more than CO2. That being said, there are other types of blockchain that are being put forward. Algorand is one, the NEAR protocol is another. But when it comes to environmental impact of cryptocurrencies and blockchain, and in particular, I like the last presentation, what we actually need to do is find a balance. We need to actually be able to say, this is where you can make a direct impact environmentally from blockchain, and this is where you have a net negative. So we need to understand that in order to help the world mitigate and adapt.
Thank you so much for the opinion. Carl or Alex, do you have any personal experience with this, or a different opinion on, or anything you would like to add to the question? Alex, you're muted.
I just very briefly, I would like to stress, because it's very important and it's not much on the radar, what Kathy mentioned about the energy consumption is not the only. Electronic waste, for example, from mining is a huge problem too. So let's not keep like this tunnel vision on the debate about the energy consumption, because by the way, Bitcoin doesn't consume energy. It's people who uses Bitcoin, by the way. I always like to say that. And they do so because they have financial incentives. So turning back to the point, yeah, it's important. It's a huge impact, the one of the carbon footprint, but there are also other important points to be assessed and to be present in everyone's mind.
Okay, thank you. Carl, do you have anything to add or comment on?
Just a quick generalization, and that is that there usually are goods and there are bads in every action. And I mean, when you're dealing with vulnerable communities, you don't want to do something that's carbon intensive as a solution for adaptation as well. So we do need to pay attention, even if you're focused on adaptation, to the mitigation implications of carbon intensive infrastructure protection or what have you.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to ask about another question. Are we doing enough, actually? And there's so much that can be done in climate action, of course, with the technologies that we have. But are we doing enough to innovate? Are we quick enough, actually? And Alex, you're helping companies to offset their carbon. What is your view? Could we be doing more? You know.
Well, I think the pace is not bad. I mean, we are taking advantage of the pain points that blockchain technology can use. But for the moment, and this is changing progressively, and we hope to be a main actor here, we can see that the layer or the pain point that blockchain is solving or helping to solve now, it's more about transparency, accountability, prevention of double counting, and so on. The real acceleration of action will come when we are able to, using blockchain technology, to establish new incentives and realign incentives about all that has to do with climate change. Because blockchain itself, it's a tool that is being used by humans, and humans are the way they are. Climate change, for example, is a clear example of a tragedy of the commons, when everyone is like consuming a resource looking for a personal gain, ignoring the well-being of society. But well, using game theory, incentives, applying the right incentives to the right actors at the right times, we can save behaviors, and that's the key.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Carl, are we moving fast enough in adaptation?
No, that's
so
simple.
What can we do more? And I know there is way more talk about mitigation than there is about adaptation, and adaptation needs more. But what more do we need? What topics are we lacking in conversations?
Well, we've discussed this, I know, Bara, and we're working together to try to come up with some proposals, broadly speaking, within the INATBA community that we can convey to the broader community, starting with the blockchain community, to the extent there's a blockchain community. And that is that, okay, I've made the case at how far behind adaptation is. Mitigation, and I started out in mitigation. I love mitigation. Mitigation is essential. It's formative. I started working on it in 1994, and I've always worked on climate. It's only been 12 years now. Only 12 years I've been working on adaptation. But even now, compared to 12 years ago, there hasn't been much progress. Why hasn't there been much progress? Because I think adaptation is just such a messy issue because it covers every system. It requires all sorts of different solutions. Mitigation is complex. There are hundreds of different things. If you consider energy systems and deforestation, alleviation, and all of those, no doubt. But if you're dealing with basically the whole system and how you're basically trying to protect people from life and livelihood loss, then it's much more difficult to articulate. Well, what is this thing called adaptation, and how does one do adaptation? You don't just do it; it's across a different set of areas. But the fact of the matter is, we need to have a better understanding over how the blockchain community can get information from, for instance, the physical scientists and the engineers and the social scientists who are looking at, well, what happens with the climate that results in impacts, and what are the technologies, I'm talking basic infrastructural and operational technologies, that can reduce those vulnerabilities. And then based on that, we can then take a look at, well, what is that information and how can we more securely convey it with greater trust, with more potential for conveying value and information to the right and appropriate people to align those incentives, as we've already discussed. And that needs to require policy decisions about, well, what are the metrics? What are the appropriate tools that governments need to communicate to the market? And then blockchain developers might be able to start taking advantage of that.
So that said, what in your mind are the roadblocks, the main roadblocks? And you said it a little bit, but
yeah. Well, it's a few things. One, and that's why I focused 2/3 of my talk on just basically adaptation 101. What is this thing? It's easy to understand wind farms. It's easy to understand, in a way, climate, carbon credits, in a way, kind of, sort of, if you're in the space and have been in it for a while. And there have been people who've been working on carbon credits now for 20 years, So, okay, so there's people who get it. And it's something you can tokenize very easy. It's specific, and people have already defined it poorly or well, but they have. Adaptation, I've got this idea called a climate vulnerability reduction credit, and we're piloting it, but it's trying to take information from a whole set of disparate things, not just physical science, but also economic and social and what have you, and turn it into something, a metric that can then be conveyed over so that you can create these incentives. That's one thing. Then there's policies. What are the policies that are required by governments in particular, but also by large companies and bodies, that will allow for us to say, this is a priority. Where's the money? The money isn't there yet. And then thirdly, there's a lack of articulation of the project opportunities from sectors or what have you. And that's because of the complexities and the lack of the metrics and the lack of the ways of us to communicate where the value is and what the impacts are going to be. I hope that helped.
Yes, thank you so much. Kathy, do you want to add anything, or from your point of view, the research perspective, are we moving fast enough with innovation, or what are the roadblocks, even if you will, if you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I would say that no, we're not moving fast enough. I think that the one problem with research is the way that it's actually done. Is it means that it really moves sometimes just far too slowly. But it is the nature of research that should also be done slowly. I think what we need to see is actually faster translation of what is happening in the research world into the actual real world. That the research to real world connection, and also. I think, for example, Carl, your ideas are all extraordinarily multidisciplinary, and those kind of questions are the ones that researchers, I believe, truly should be working on at the moment. Should be interdisciplinary rather than domain specific, because climate change is so complex, the adaptation is so complex, and the social and economic and cultural heritage impacts, if we go back to cultural heritage, are actually going to be pretty profound. And we know it's coming, and for us not to work on it at the moment is really stupid, basically. So yeah, but that's why this kind of panel is great, because you meet some fantastic people working on this stuff.
I have to say the topic of interoperability and working across multiple disciplines is so important for, especially for climate action, if we want to progress it. And, you know, talking about climate and where we are at the moment, so we are facing a new challenge, new global challenge with COVID. You know, from your experience, have you seen any change in mindset of people when it comes to climate action, and how they approach sustainability or climate action, or did their behavior change? Did the behavior of companies change after the pandemic hit? And any one of you who wants to respond?
Well, I think, no, go ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to say I have a very small comment, which is that I've noticed that people are starting to take greenwashing significantly less well. They're starting to really challenge it and really question it. That's the one thing I've started to notice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'd like to say one thing principally, and then do a little bit of elaboration. That is that Mother Nature trumps anything else. The pandemic showed that. And this is just a little thing, the pandemic. Little. Nothing like what we can face in the future. And that's even talking public health. We can face worse things, possibly owing to climate change, possibly owing to just the fact that there are risks out there that we haven't fully realized. But then also, I think there's two things I would note. One is that we've seen, and I wish, you know, I've been working on this issue now for almost 30 years. And initially, back in the 90s, yeah, climate change. Yeah, we got to worry about that. Yeah. And so let's do some voluntary programs, and let's try to do things where there's no real, you know, it's win-win and things like that, you know, and everyone will be happy if you have more energy efficient light bulbs. Great. A nice start. But then we had this policy track, and we had the Kyoto Protocol, and then we had that end, and nothing really followed up with nearly the rigor. Copenhagen was not that great. Okay, well, now what's happened in the last few years? I see that, one, more so than ever, people are looking at these wildfires. They're looking at these people dying off in India owing to 48-degree temperature events. We're seeing, you know, just time and time again, flooding and everything else, just over the past few years. I wish it wasn't happening. I'm saddened that the climate skeptics were wrong, or the climate deniers were wrong, but they were wrong. We're facing issues, and the climate models are showing things are actually, the climate models were overly optimistic, right? It's worse than what they were because they were trying to be conservative, right? But that was actually being a little too wild and crazy. You should apply the precautionary principle. So young people are getting involved more. People are seeing this as a more fundamental issue, and I think these are good. I hope it's enough.
I agree.
Yeah, completely.
Alex, yes, Alex, did you want to add maybe to it?
Yeah,
your companies.
Yeah, in this regard of this question, I would like to start with a little point regarding the last question. In general, of course, we are not acting fast enough. There will never be fast enough for what is at stake. Now, what I meant is that given in the innovation or blockchain related sustainability space, we have to take in account that right now there are around 140 million users of blockchain technology. We still don't have a critical mass to have a big effect and foster the effects of that innovation. But first, this population is growing very fast, like with some traction from the two groups that I want to mention now that are having this impact in things to hopefully change more fast. One, it's like the way millennials do their purchase decisions. They are definitely, and this is something that is not new for anyone here, like concerned about sustainability issues. And the other one is how investors are allocating money today, because we have been in a point in which if there is not sustainable practice and sustainable business, there won't be any profitability to yield or to farm in the future. So now, in the way or in the side of the market and the customers, we have a growing population that is concerned and is conscious. And in the business world, let's say it like in this way, we also have this concern. So hopefully those two forces will retro feedback each other to accelerate the pace in which we are acting and we are decarbonizing Earth.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think it raises the question, in whose hand lies the solution mainly? Is it governments? Is it individuals who are saying like they can't change the climate really? It has to come from the governments who are not moving enough, etc. What's your view? Like, should the millennials, should the young, should the children be the ones who will actually make the ultimate change? Or is it the government? Is it all about the policies mainly? Is it about private companies? What's your view? Like, who should help with the dramatic change that needs to happen? Or is it a combination, of course? If anyone of you wants to comment.
Well, I would say this, and that is, it's all of those, but we are who we are. and we're you know, we have a voice, and we have some very promising solutions that have been proven in many cases and can be further developed. And we have an understanding over how we could take these further and make transformational changes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not the only part of the solution, but we have to start with ourselves as, you know, a community, and just refocus our efforts on engaging with all of those different ones. I would say this, that fundamentally, I think these things do come down to politics and public sentiment. And it ultimately drives from the bottom up. As soon as the politicians hear things, and they will create permissions for the private sector or incentives from themselves that can, you know, help to unleash all of the necessary energy and help us to provide the solutions.
Thank you.
Under my point of view, and it doesn't has to reflect the climate trade's point of view. Sometimes I'm not even responsible for what I say, so it's not going to be climate trade. So, I mean, the market has caused this mess, so the market should fix it. And the market is composed, like Carl was saying, about all range of stakeholders. But at first, economy is like the driving force. Sadly or fortunately, I'm not going to enter into that. But what it's clear is, like, being drastic and dramatic, forbid fossil fuels. Easy. Stop economic growth. Easy. Oh, but that's it.
Yes.
But it's really complex. I was being a little bit sarcastic here. If it wasn't
I understand.
clear,
I know.
enough.
It was clear. Don't worry.
But that's the problem. And I was safe when I read about the leakings about the IPCC last report that were recommending to stop economic growth, or to slow down economic growth for the sake of our survival. I was like, wow, this is huge, tremendously huge. How a group of top-tier scientific in the climate space are saying this to the world. The situation is really critical, and we really should reflect about this, because our society advocates for infinite growth. It's always growth. Until when? I mean, the world is not infinite, and the economic growth that we are pursuing, it's infinite. There is something that is not matching here.
Katie, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so for my sins, I have studied both engineering and economics, and so I find these questions really quite fascinating, because from my personal perspective, back to your question, I think what we're realizing is that we no longer live in a democracy. Actually, what we live in, sadly, since the 1980s, we have slowly but surely progressed towards a corporate-run world. We are a corporate-run world. 140 companies in this country, globally, pretty much own the significant amount of our economy, whatever we want to call it. Right? Now, with regards to our economic structure, I think it was fantastic that the IPC said that, because I think in the broad scope of things, people generally think about economics as neoclassical economics. The market system that we all talk about is pretty much invented by the Chicago School of Economics. here's a newsflash about economic theory, guys. We can invent new ones. If we want to continue to have economic growth, well, hey, how about we change the way we measure economic growth, rather than saying we need to stop these things. Actually, we need to use the markets to refocus our efforts in different areas. So that's what I truly believe. But at the end of the day, all hands on deck. All of the above need to make dramatic change. That's where we're at now.
Okay, thank you so much, Kathy. So we are almost out of our allocated time. Any last comments from anyone before I hand over back to Christian? That's okay. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you so much for your presentations and your opinions on the questions. And I would like to hand over back to Christian. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you, Bara. Thank you, everybody. Wow, that's a tough one to follow up on. So I'm not even going to try. What a lot of fascinating projects and interesting discussions today. So many important things mentioned. Let's hope we can all do it, and let's hope we can do it right before it's too late. I'm fairly sure that if there were any skeptics of blockchain and DLTs attending today, we might have started to change their minds, at least a little. For me, it's clear that the blockchain and DLTs can have a significant social impact, and this is just the beginning. So let's hope more is to come. But on behalf of the Blockchain Observatory and Forum, I would like to encourage you all to continue the great work and to keep exploring new possibilities. I would also encourage everyone to keep the debate going, voice your views and opinions about the potential of blockchain and DLTs, as well as share your views and obstacles. So much more can be done, but we want more of these projects to become reality. It's already amazing work, but let's enable more of them. It's been really great to have you here. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and at the risk of sounding a bit like an award acceptance speech, and hopefully not getting any names wrong this time, I would like to thank the European Commission for the Blockchain Observatory and Forum. I would like to thank IOTA and INATBA for their excellent collaboration on this event. It has been really great. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our keynote speaker, Mariana, all of our panelists and our moderators, Osa and Bara. I wish everybody a great morning, day, or night, depending on where on our lovely globe you are. And we hope to see you again at the next event. So thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you so much. Have all a nice Christmas.
Thanks, Bara. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.